25 years in business, it is. And first, thank you very much for the messages I received. Some of you might have seen it on LinkedIn. Some people texted me on Facebook, Instagram, while LinkedIn and now Instagram will be the main media outlets, the main media apps on which I will be active in the future. Thank you very much for any message on any platform. And of course, the many messages that I received via emails. And of course, now, you probably think this might be an episode where we only celebrate 25 years, and it couldn't be any further from the truth. We are going into a reflection, thinking about what happened in the recent past. And unfortunately, I came to the conclusion, and I had to come to the conclusion that leaders are, unfortunately, at least a large amount of them, are getting worse by the minute. And we have to think about why. There are more offers on the market than ever, a bit less since the pandemic, I agree, but there are more approaches to proper knowledge which you can freely access, and there are more offers on the market that you can access either paid or unpaid, where you get proper knowledge, and still leaders get worse by the minute. How can that happen? I'm now in business for more than 25 years if I count the time where I did IT on the side as a young pupil in the village where I grew up. Is nearly 30 years now, and this should be a very cheerful episode. Unfortunately, we have too many issues to address, and they are countless issues. And after we just recently had a massive announcement by a German satire person on TV about Nazi leaks with the German police, which is worrying enough, I thought, why not ask your network? Have they seen any infringements of their rights, or any violation of their rights, or the concept of freedom at work, or are there any kind of assaults at work, any kind of misbehavior? And the results that only came in within 3 days were absolutely shocking. And all of that is happening while at the same time we see, when you look into the studies that Gallup publishes, we have the lowest level of motivation in the workforce ever. We have quiet quitting, we have loud quitting, and we talked about that in recent episodes. If you like to see them, just look them up. Why do leaders get worse? Because that is something which we really did not expect, and also which I did not expect when I started my business. However, when we look into where we are right now, there are certain issues that are utterly shocking. So first, of course, I told you that Jan Böhmermann is a German comedian and person who does satire, published the situation with the German police. He was referring to a situation in Frankfurt with a WhatsApp Nazi group, and no consequences here. And if you want to call it funny, I don't like to call it funny, the leader of the German police said, 16 more single cases. Maybe you heard of single cases. Single cases mean something happened by a singular person, one. That's a quantifiable number. And as you can hear by my German accent, I'm quite keen to quantify it. 16 singular cases. Just imagine you are sitting there as an employee and your boss tells you there are 16 singular cases. Don't we all know these cases where you use the singular to explain the plural, or the plural to explain the singular? 16 singular cases, utter nonsense. Shame on you, federal state of the Republic of Germany. However, sometimes the state can behave quite well and be actually quite smart with answering. Elon Musk. Many people still praise Elon Musk, and I haven't done so for years. For a reason, privileged man who had countless attempts before he became successful due to his birthright privileges and the money he grew up with. He now openly called the AfD to win the next election in Germany. He did that on X, formerly Twitter, and shared a video where people got rescued. Refugees get rescued in the Mediterranean Sea. And he called for the AfD, who are, of course, a far right-wing party with members which can be legally called Nazis in Germany, which is a strong thing when a judge confirms that you can be called a fascist and a Nazi, because you are. So Elon Musk now says this party should win the election. And then he posts this video where refugees get rescued in the Mediterranean Sea, tagging a ministry and a secretary of the Federal Republic of Germany, asking, do you know this video? And the answer, and hats to the federal state and the Republic of Germany here, well, the answer, they said, yes, we know it. It's called Saving Lives. Well done. However, when we still see how bad the situation is, even in the German speakers, in a German speakers association, there was a leadership person who published a guideline to make jokes about minorities. I mean, you can't make this up. Germany, with their history, and the leadership person, who of course was back in the days in their mid and 60s. Surprise, surprise. I'm not being ageist here. Unfortunately, that group tends to do more of the offenses here. And of course, you can't publish joke guidelines. And of course, this is enough reason to step down 10 times. No consequences, no consequence. They lost leaders over this. And I have to give them credit for now changing for the better. Slowly but steadily changing for the better with the people they have on board right now, while the other people should put their head down in shame, as they have to be considered offenders as a group. When we look into where the facts are right now, we see an utterly shocking situation. You have leaders who go to 45-minute keynotes event, paying absurd amount of money to listen to a multimillionaire or billionaire sharing their wisdom, and a completely bland, maybe funny keynote might be quite entertaining, and they call it learning. And surprise, surprise, it's not learning, which is the reason why you don't see any of these people at universities. And by the way, if you spend money on this, you disqualify yourself as a leader immediately. Because, of course, anyone who now says in your organization, I like to have money for my pottery course, which is self-discovery by pottery in the Toscana or wherever else, and you say, no, I don't have money for that. Yeah, you can only say, yes, you have. When you spend money on nonsense, anyone else has the same right to do so. And of course, when you are in any kind of group that acts inappropriately, may it be a WhatsApp group, Telegram group, Signal group, and it's in any online or offline group, if you just remain silent, then you have to be considered complicit. Being silent is no excuse. So we have an example, by the way, here, Federal Republic of Germany, where they had a special forces within the German army, Bundeswehr, where, surprise, surprise, once more, we have a Nazi group was discovered via WhatsApp. Some people were in that group, but silent, and they still were affected because they said, when you work in special forces, you are aware of what's justice, what's right, and what's wrong. Nazi ideas, of course, are not right. Surprise, who could have thought? So they were fired as well. Which is pretty rare, because often they are not fired, they are only suspended from service, which means they get full payment while not working at the same time. And now we have to look into, are there certain categories? Because you have to see, where are the alarm signs? Your job is to see the alarms and then act on them. And there are alarm signs for these infringements, these violations of your rights. And the first category is the content-oriented category. And it starts with pseudoscience. Pseudoscience means someone pretends it has a scientific backing, but it doesn't. So, for example, when someone says, XYZ has said, or person X has done this, or in this book, X is stated. And by the way, an opinion book is no source. Anyone can publish a book today. Doesn't take much effort. Basically, you can go on Amazon and publish anything you like. So just because someone has said or done something doesn't mean that when you repeat it, you get the same result. This is called, and by the way, the same applies to these completely pseudoscientific personality tests, where you categorize people as red, green, purple, or brown, or whatever, and then you make decisions based on that. If you want to have it a bit more differentiated, I published an own episode only about personality tests. So this pseudoscience of people pretending there's a science behind that, but there is not, is often the case when you see leaders acting inappropriately. By the way, some people don't even put that effort in there. Some leaders go straight forward for the non-scientific part, means they put their personal opinion out there. They normally add the word experience to it. In my experience, XYZ. That's straightforward, non-scientific. Your experience does not reflect on science as long as you don't have proof for something that's working. Personal opinion being declared effect is, especially without any references, is completely unscientific. And the third aspect of the content-oriented category is if someone acts arbitrarily. And there you have phrases that you probably heard. Probably people said something like, we've always done it that way, or we've never done it that way. Or if these two don't work, people say something like, well, anyone can come up and just say something else. Who do you think you are? And especially this, who do you think you are, is the arbitrariness in the phrase. And a new one, which we heard in the last years, is we are a conservative industry. 85% of all companies claim to be a conservative industry, which means nothing else than, well, I don't want to change, so please don't start any change, while at the same time, leaders expect you to change at any point in time given. And of course, normally, with these inappropriate phrases, there are certain allusions, normally either to age, race, social upbringing, the amount of years you're in the organization, or any other random factor they can bring up which they are not shy about using against you. That is the first category. The second category is up personal attacks. So people often ask you to obey, but of course they don't use obey, because obey would be very negative. They are smarter than that. Many people learn that saying you have to obey me doesn't sound great. So they expect you to be loyal. And loyal means I say something and you do whatever I say. So it's not about loyalty in the real sense. It's about loyalty that the leader has no idea about how to lead you properly. So they just appeal to your loyalty. Often they say something like, there's a duty for you, or a fiduciary duty when you work for us, blah, blah, blah. It's all straightforward nonsense. And the second category of inappropriate behavior, infringements, violations, offenses, or even proper assaults. And by the way, normally they add something else when they go for the personal attacks. They either, that's the more old-fashioned way, they refer to something which is physical. You're unable to do X, Y, Z because of some sort of physical trait you have. Today, they more go for psychological traits. Psychological traits, you're too emotional or you're too hard. They just twist it the way around they want it. And then they say, you are unsuitable for X, Y, Z. There is no proof or evidence that. Basically, they say, I just don't want you. And they make something up. And when they go for the very worst category, there are direct verbal attacks, of course, verbally, because they don't want to leave any proof. They always think there is never any evidence until someone publishes it. Back in the days, they called it locker room talk. For those who are not familiar with the term, locker room talk means there's a non-diverse group of people in a room, and that's locker room talk. And suddenly they think, oh, no one's listening, so now we can talk. And by the way, if anything violates, infringes rights of others, which is said in this room, any way of publishing it is automatically legitimate. And by the way, from a legal point of view, it is, because when you violate rights, declaring or showing what you've done always has priority over some sort of pseudo loyalty of non-diverse old people's club or whatever. So be aware of the fact that personal attacks, second category, are another alarm sign. So we have 2 out of 3. So first one is the content-oriented category. Second one is the personal category. And the third one is the legal category. The legal category is either when they assault you physically. That became pretty rare in recent years, depending on where you work. But normally in an industrialized first world country, you don't have physical attacks. However, there are exceptions, and these exceptions are very, very shocking when you listen to them. Either physical attacks or sexual harassment in a very physical way. Shocking to the core. Shocking to the core. Way more often they work on a psychological level. So the legal assault is on the psychological level. It could be mobbing, any kind of harassment. They don't approach you physically, but they know exactly the line where they approach and then put certain pressure upon you on a psychological level. And the by the way, worst category is when leaders are completely helpless. They go by so-called working law minimalism. So they go into the law of your country and they interpret everything at the minimal standard to make it as hard as possible for you not to commit any offense. I give you an example. With one company, there was a management that didn't do too well for 12 years straight. So while anyone else in the industry was growing, they stagnated or even shrunk a bit with their business due to bad management and bad leadership. And after 12 years, one woman spoke up and made it public. 1 week later, she received a warning letter for, and now buckle up, for tapping in for work time and then putting her bike into the place where it belongs, except that they expected her to do it the other way around. First put your bike somewhere and then tap in for the working time. The difference between that is 90 seconds, probably 60 seconds. So when you do that, by the way, it is not very smart to do that, because people can do exactly the same thing with you when you ask them to do something. So when you say, hey, there's lots of work to do, could you please today stay 10 minutes longer? They say, sorry, these 10 minutes are not in my working contract. So sorry, it's 40 hours and goodbye. And in many countries, by the way, not even 40 hours. So you are the first one falling short of resources. So we have 3 categories: content-oriented, personal, and the legal aspect of it. Now we have to talk about how to do it better. First, we need proper development programs. And I see that development programs for leaders, and just look back in the days, just look back in time. Back in the days, no company would have ever thought about would have ever thought about allowing you to lead anyone without proper development how to do that. Unfortunately, today, we often see people who have done a certain job well for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, normally more shorter than longer. And then they think, oh, now you're ready to lead people. I give you a couple of examples. Just because you're able to sell does not mean you're a great sales leader. Just because you're great in operations doesn't mean you're a great operational leader. Just because you're a great bookkeeper doesn't mean that you're a great team lead for bookkeeping, and so on and so forth. Because when you do something, when you're a leader, your job is only partially, probably not at all, to do that task, but to empower others, to put your ego back, to let others rise and shine, to put others in the spotlight, and to make other people successful. And you need proper means to do that. Just because you understood something doesn't mean that you can explain it to anyone else. What you need is a proper development program, and for different positions, different development programs. There always has to be some sort of professional guidance. Often there's an external person, that can be done internally when people are well qualified as trainers, coaches, mentors. Just because someone is a great leader doesn't mean they are remotely qualified to deliver training, speaking, coaching, or whatever else. So it has to be done by someone who's professionally qualified. It has to be founded in science. So you need to know the knowledge with a scientific background. It has to be practice oriented. And by the way, when it is slightly entertaining, no one will say, I didn't want that. Because sometimes knowledge can be pretty straightforward, pretty hard to learn, and pretty complicated to understand. And when you have someone with a sense of humor, and I know how shocking it might sound to you that a German suggests you to use humor, shocking to me as well, it is for you. However, when you have knowledge, being entertaining helps. After you implemented these development programs, always look for the second aspect, regular feedback. The best to do is 360-degree feedback, which means from higher hierarchical levels, your hierarchical level, and the lower hierarchical level, lower in high commas here. They give you feedback, and most importantly, you act on the feedback. Because hardly ever will the feedback be, oh, so amazing, perfect person, we don't know anything that we could improve. That hardly ever is the case. You need, and that's the third point, continuous education. And I know that there are certified programs that cover the basics. These will never make you excel in the workforce or on the working market. And of course, some people, especially in the last couple of weeks, said, oh, you always ask for proper education, by the way. Niels, what do you do? I think I'm doing quite something, but it's up to you to judge that. So go on LinkedIn, click on education, and then you see what I've done the last years. And when you say this is not proper education, then I'm happy to discuss that with you. Besides that, I'm doing an MBA, besides working full-time, which is now going for the final year. And I'm doing an executive MBA as well, which is also going for the final year, all besides doing my full-time job. Very important here is there is no one size fits all. Sometimes you need an MBA or an executive MBA or a bachelor's degree or a doctorate program. Sometimes you need a certificate course. It is just very important that these courses must be led professionally and founded in science, delivered by professionally trained and qualified people, because otherwise it probably will be horribly boring. So very important here is, what will not help you is when you have a manager and you want to make him a leader or her, when you want to make that person a leader, when you simply say, we sent you to a course and this is led by one of your mates, and you go to a nice hotel, terribly expensive, and you have nice 3 days, but there's no content delivered that you actually care about. You basically want to have corporate vacations. Your people have very, very fine perceptions for exactly these moments. So be aware that proper education has to be delivered on a professional level with the criteria that I just told you about. And by the way, aspect number 4 here, it's okay to say stop. It's okay that sometimes there's a certain point in life where you say, hey, I now care about something else. Normally, I'd like to put career first and the education and this and that, all work. And there might be a certain point in life where you say, stop, family is more important, children are more important. And often you have employers who make both possible. But let's face it, there might be a situation in your career where you have to make a decision because your hours are limited and so are mine. And I make this decision as well, depending on different days and different situations, of course. And when you say stop to your continuous education, it's okay to say stop at a certain point in time. However, When you reach that point in time, the time also starts for the 1 or 2 years where you now onboard someone who's going to take your job. You cannot be a leader, ask anyone to be change ready and to go for continuous education, and at the same time, you don't do anything of that. And surprise, surprise, people consider you a non-credible leader, which, by the way, automatically makes you a manager, not a leader. When you do not deliver on the promise that you expect from others, do not be surprised when people hold you accountable for the promises you propose to them. So it's okay to say stop, but be aware of the consequence. And when you go for proper education, the word proper is important here, and not another mates training, coaching session, or whatever else we see on the market there. And now there's aspect number 5. When there is a certain misconduct, either deliberately or by coincidence, then there is an investigation. And of course, with the investigation, I mean there's an assumption of innocence. But when you see there is no innocence left and there's proof and evidence for wrong behavior, then there has to be consequences. Can be feedback, can be criticism, can be a talk, can be a warning letter, can be a dismissal, can be that someone gets straightforward fired on the job. But what is not an option is that you simply suspend people from work and say, oh, the person's gone. By the way, they now receive full pay for the next 2 years without showing up for work. Aren't we great executives? No, you are not. Some people realize that when they show a certain misconduct, they will not be put in front of the public prosecutor, but they basically get 2 years of payment with no work to be done. And that is the perfect retirement funding for some of them. Be very aware of the fact that misconduct, and again, I say investigation with the assumption of innocence. When the investigation shows you've done something wrong, then consequences have to be shown. And by the way, any of these consequences needs proper measures accompanying them, and these measures have to be structured and documented. And here we are. I know what some of you might now think about sending me an email asking a certain question, so I'm going to address that proactively. I'm now 25 years in business, and people often ask me, when you talk about these managers acting inappropriately, did you ever experience like that? And I think young people would now call that real talk. And here's the real talk. I'm now 25 years in business. And the infringements, violations, or assault that you can experience, especially as an external person, but you can also have it as an internal person as well. I don't want to distinguish here. I can tell you, as a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, not a single week passes without them. First, I want to tell you the German-speaking area, especially Germany, I definitely want to say that there's a massive difference between Austria, Switzerland, and Germany, Germany by far being the worst. The English-speaking market is ahead 10 years. Some people only learn to be more subtle with their misconduct. I am aware of that. But the UK and the US, with the countermeasures they have in place, made unambiguously clear that when you act inappropriately, you basically have to leave the door same day or next day, or you're sent home 2 weeks later at the end of the investigation. You may return when everything's okay. But often there's evidence on the table already when the claim is brought up. The English-speaking world is far, far ahead, and please keep doing so. I can tell you not a single week passes without me experiencing anything similar, often, especially, by the way, often from so-called colleagues from my industry. And I know this is going to happen again after this podcast. I'm criticizing, as you heard in the beginning, my own industry. And some people are very, very special when it comes to that, because they say, oh, we shouldn't talk about that publicly. Of course we should, because otherwise nothing changes. I experienced countless cases of that, especially in Germany, especially by so-called top speakers, keynote speakers. The speaking association really are the pest of the industry. A really bunch of ego people with very little expertise and experience, but with big egos and big mouth. Many of them with a privileged background, and they can't live with the fact that someone who doesn't align with their so-called ideas of loyalty, as I mentioned before, that someone dares to open their mouth. So yes, I speak from experience, so I can also tell you how to deal with that. So maybe you wonder, is there a 25-year anniversary wish? And yes, there is. I only have one wish that you now listen to this podcast. Be part of the solution, not part of the problem. That is the only wish that I have for the next 25 and more years, because I do not plan to classically retire. And for these 25 years, for now, there's only one word, two words I'd like to say at the end, and that is thank you. Before we go to the final of this podcast, and of course, you might now think, wow, that's quite tough for a 25-year anniversary podcast. You expected something more cheerful. So I can tell you first, you expected a cheerful episode. I am still German. I might live in Zurich and London and travel the world wherever. However, I'm still German. You're cheerful and German normally doesn't align. Here we go again. So if you know of any kind of ideas or aspects, or you might say, hey, I have an issue here, I don't know how to handle this, just drop me an email, nb@nb-networks.com. I also put the email address in the show notes of this podcast. If you need someone who delivers training, speaking, coaching on this, just drop me a line as well. But we can also just talk about your points and then either exchange via email, or we have a call or Zoom, whatever you prefer. And by the way, thank you very much. I received one person asking for doing my podcast on YouTube, where I first thought they expected some sort of video show. I'm not a video editor, but no, they didn't. They said they would only like to have a video to see me talking, because then they can see the subtitles and also read my lips, which makes it more inclusive. A brilliant idea. We're already on here. We're already here to see if we can make that happen, because this is not a podcast where I'm sitting in a studio, as you can probably hear. I am traveling many days a year, and I'm doing this besides all of my work and just doing it normally in hotel rooms or wherever else, because this podcast, as I said from episode 1 in the very beginning, is all about content, not about ego or a fancy studio. It's all about content. But we are looking into how to make it possible, and I think we might have found a solution. So stay tuned here. You will see a bit more on YouTube. I was quite surprised when I looked at my YouTube channel that there are about 100 and a bit more people per month who listen to my podcast on YouTube. They say that it's easier for them to use YouTube, and they prefer that app over either Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Didn't know about that. So thank you very much for listening to them as well. We are working on the video thing. So thank you very much for this suggestion, which also, if you have any kind of special topic that you like to talk about, just drop me an email and then we take it from there. The second aspect, I always recommend to register for the leadership letter, because all the live Q&A sessions are announced on the leadership letter. Now we have a direct access, so you don't even need to register anymore. You just need to click on the link. However, the access link is only in the leadership letter. When you go to expert.nb-networks.com, you can register there, and then you receive the leadership letter. Only one email a week every Wednesday morning. It's 100% content at free guarantee. And then you see when we have live sessions, and then you can just join us, and then we can talk either in English or in German. I'm open for both of that. And also I put this link in the show notes of this podcast. And the third and final aspect is, it is a special moment to be in business for 25 years, I can tell you. I have to say thank you very much to all of you. I'm looking forward to many years to come. And thank you very much for your support as well. And at the end of this podcast, there's always one line that I say, and you probably think I'm going to change that for the 25-year anniversary. Hear the news, I don't. So at the end of this podcast, I say thank you very much for 25 years. Have an amazing week. And at the end of this podcast, I wish you, besides the perfect week, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.